Welcome to Glioblastoma AKA GBM, a podcast brought to you by the Glioblastoma Research Organization, highlighting stories of GBM warriors, caregivers, medical advisors, and more. Welcome to Season 3 of our podcast, where we delve deep into the world of glioblastoma, also known as GBM. Join us as we navigate the complexities of glioblastoma with expert insights and heartfelt narratives. Please remember that the information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, or prevent any disease, and you should contact your medical provider or healthcare team with any questions. Plus Therapeutics is developing a novel treatment for recurrent glioblastoma patients. Their targeted radiotherapeutic has the potential to deliver a single yet highly powerful radiation dose directly to a tumor without damaging healthy tissue or causing significant side effects. They are currently enrolling patients for their NIH-supported RESPECT GBM clinical trial. For more information on this recurrent glioblastoma trial, please visit respect-trials.com/GBM. Holly Gainsboro, welcome back to Glioblastoma AKA GBM. The viewers, the listeners, are hearing you for the first time. I'm now hearing you for the second, thanks to some incredible audio technical difficulties. So welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for you to talk about your journey with grief, with your late husband Stephen and glioblastoma, and everything in between. So thank you for being here and being willing to record for a second time.
Well, everything I say is worth saying twice.
What is that saying? I think it's like women say things 50% more than men, because women always have to repeat themselves.
And men only hear 25% of it.
Right, so I'm sorry. But thank you for coming, not coming back, but thanks for not leaving.
No, honestly, I'm honored to be here. I really am. I'm so thrilled to be with you in person. We've been talking for a long time.
It's been like 2 years now, maybe?
About a year and a half.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah. So I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be sitting across from you in person.
Yay! So exciting. Okay, so for those who don't know who you are, I'd love for you to share more about who Holly Gainsboro is, what you're currently working on, and if you want to just lead that into your experience with glioblastoma.
Yeah, and we'll start with my experience. So February 12th, 2009, and there are some dates that we all know we will never, ever forget. They are just seared into our minds forever. It was the day that Stephen was diagnosed with glioblastoma. We, like everybody who hears this diagnosis, is blindsided and not understanding how this happened. Where did this come from? Seemingly very healthy man that all of a sudden has this tumor in his brain.
Yeah.
And so when we heard that, and originally we had gone to the neurosurgeon after he had an MRI, his primary care physician said it was an abscess or a cyst, which is what the radiology report said, that we went to this neurosurgeon because we knew whatever it was needed to come out. It's his brain. And when they said, oh, he has glioblastoma, now, of course, I heard glio blah, 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 blah. I had no idea what he's saying. And he said, it's a malignant brain tumor. And my response was, no, he doesn't. It's a cyst. What are you talking about? And he said, no, this is what this is. And my first thought was, what do I tell my children? And I remember Stephen and I leaving the surgeon's office in the parking lot, and Stephen, I was like, oh my gosh. We were stunned, and we talked about the kids, and you'll learn more about Stephen as we talk the next several minutes, that because of what a beautiful man he was, and he is, he will always be. When we talked about the children, what about, this is going to be so hard for the kids. One of the things that Stephen said was, our kids will become more compassionate, sensitive human beings because of this experience.
Right.
And I thought, wow, this man just got a terminal illness diagnosis, and he's thinking about what the children are going to learn from it. And I thought, that's an incredible human being.
Yeah.
I married an incredible human being. So that was really beautiful. Then of course we've got to tell the children, and we're trying to figure all of this out, and what does this look like? And he was supposed to be operated on in Charlotte, which is where we live, Charlotte, North Carolina. But I kept hearing about Duke. And so I said, okay, I'm going to get him to Duke. So Alan Friedman is the surgeon, at Duke, who's world-renowned. And I found his email address on a Saturday, emailed him Saturday night, and that was February 15th, I gotta think. That was February 14th. And I emailed him, and said Sunday morning I woke up to an email from him saying, I'll see you Monday.
Wow.
And so I called my sister-in-law, Stephen's sister, and said, get your ass to Charlotte. We're going to Duke tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And she did. She flew down, and we went. The three of us went together, left the kids at home, packed our bags, thinking that maybe we could be there and get the surgery done right away. And so when he looked at the scan, and he said, well, I won't know for sure until I get in there, because that's typically what they say, which is the right thing to say. And he said, I can do it this Friday. So the Jewish wife that I am said, can't you do it sooner? And he said, no, Holly, I can't do it sooner. I'm moving a benign surgery. So, yeah, so he was operated on just, a week later after being diagnosed. And the journey really began then.
Yeah. What was that like for you guys? I mean, first, obviously, hearing the word glioblastoma, did you take to Google as many people do, or what was the trajectory of what you guys did?
I didn't. And that the surgeon in Charlotte said, don't start Googling things. Don't start looking it up.
Yeah.
We're also talking 15 years ago, so there wasn't as much stuff on the internet. Mm-hmm. But I didn't. Stephen did, but he couldn't remember what it was called.
Right.
Now, I will share with you as well that this was not my first go-around with somebody in my life having a brain tumor.
Really?
My Uncle Eddie, my father's younger brother, was diagnosed in January of 89, I think it was January of 89, with glioblastoma.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he died in November, shortly after Thanksgiving in 1989.
Wow.
So this wasn't new to me, but it was new to me.
Right.
But I thought about my family. I thought about my cousins and my aunt, and thought what that was like for them, because I didn't know what it was like for them. I was in my 20s at that time. And so, when I'd go home and tell my parents, and my father, I said, I know twice in one lifetime. Like,
yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
How did you guys tell your kids that he had a brain tumor?
Not well. I feel like I could have handled it differently. I don't like to think about that day. I think about it, but hindsight. I brought him home. We came home. Liana had theater class that night. And so I said, let's keep things as normal as we can until it's not. Yeah. So I took her, but Derek said, I want to come with you. Derek knew something was up because I asked Derek to get her off the school bus. She was in 6th grade, and he was in 10th grade. So he was home before. I said, will you get Leon off the bus? I'm taking Dad to the doctor. And I don't know. I think I said hit something with his eyes. I don't know what I told him.
Yeah.
But he knew something was up.
Kids know.
Yeah. And so Derek came. He said, I'm going to come with you to take Liana to theater class. So I drop her off, and he said, okay, what's going on?
Yeah.
And what the surgeon told us, that you don't need to tell them that it's a malignant brain tumor, just say Dad has something in his brain. That's all you need to say. You don't need to give any more information until we really have it. So I said, Dad's got something going on with his brain. We don't know everything yet. And I remember Derek saying, stop the car. I think I pulled over so I could tell him. And he got out of the car and he threw up.
Really?
It was heartbreaking. It was so heartbreaking. And then we get Liana to go home. And I think I must have called Stephen to say I'm on my way home. And a friend of ours, he had called a friend. I left him home by himself. This is what hurts me when I think back 15 years ago from diagnosis day, is that I left him home alone to sit with this information because I was tending to my children. And if I could do it over, I would. But I keep saying to you over and over, hindsight is an illusion. And I did what I could do with the information I had. So I said to Stephen, you need to get our friend out of the house. We're coming home right now. Mm-hmm. So Leon, knew something was wrong. And I didn't want to go in the house with the friend there. So I pulled into the cul-de-sac across from our house. And Leon was like, what's wrong? What's going on? What's wrong? And she said, who's dying? I said, nobody's dying. Mm-hmm. And Derek got out of the front seat, sat in the back seat with her. And I said, Daddy's got something with his brain. So I told them myself. We didn't get to do it as a couple. Mm-hmm. Stephen was such a remarkable man that he was okay with all of that. I said, I shouldn't have left you. I'm so sorry I left you home alone. He said, it's okay. That's just who he was. And he was busy calling everybody to tell them. He was calling everybody. And my sister-in-law calls me as the kids and I are pulling into the garage, and she said, I keep getting phone calls from everybody. He hadn't even told his sister yet. So I was like, she said, what's going on? I said, oh, Amy, did he not? She said, no, I don't know what's going on. Like, she knew he had been to the doctor. She knew something was going on, but she didn't know what the surgeon had said.
Right.
So that was a crazy time. And we walked in the house, and they hugged him, and they cried, and we said, we are going to fight this, and he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
What did the next steps look like for you guys as a family? Like, when he was going, he did a bunch of different treatments, and now he had multiple surgeries.
Right.
Like, what did that look like in your household?
Well, because he was treated at Duke and was operated on at Duke, we had to leave the kids. Mm-hmm. So, we went that Monday for Alan Freeman to look at him, and then said, now we need to come back. So we drove home that Monday and knew we had to go back up to Duke that Wednesday, because he'd have to do the Thursday morning, the mapping, the what they call that brain mapping, MRI. So that Tuesday we took the kids out of school. The school knew, both schools knew, the middle school and the high school knew, and we spent the day with the kids and did, all sorts of fun stuff with them. But we had to leave. So we left that Wednesday. His surgery was on a Friday, and we couldn't go home until like the end of the following week. We were gone for 10 days.
Oh, wow.
Because he needed to stay up near the hospital to make sure that he was okay. So my best friend Jody, my very best friend, she flew to Charlotte to be with the kids. And so she stayed with them for the first half of our time being at Duke, and then my parents, who live in Charlotte, took over the last half. So we weren't with them. So when we got the full diagnosis after the surgery, which was it is glioblastoma, my kids didn't know that yet.
Yeah.
Because I didn't tell anybody, because I didn't want anybody to tell my kids.
Yeah.
So when we got home, and it must have been that Thursday or Friday, we had to sit them down. And we said, Daddy has a brain tumor. Well, Dad, they don't call him Daddy. Dad has a brain tumor, and this is what we're going to do, and he's going to be okay. And so that was how we felt that Dad's going to be okay.
What were the conversations that you and Stephen had, like, initially that, okay, you guys found out that it's a grade 4 brain tumor. What did you guys talk about? Like, what were some decisions you had to make, or what were, like, the first things that came to mind? We
decided we were going to do whatever we could do to keep him alive.
Okay.
And he had a great attitude. When he was first diagnosed on Thursday, the 12th, that Friday morning he woke up and said, "Oh God, why me?" As patients do when they hear of terminal diagnosis. And I said, "Baby, why not you? I came from a place of love when I said it. Why not you? What makes you or us more special than anybody else?" And he said, "You're right." And from that moment on, he never complained. He never questioned the whys of it. And he just lived those times that he was here with so much gratitude and thankfulness and blessings. That's how we lived.
Yeah.
So we lived with, it was hard. We cried. We certainly cried together. And we also made a choice, and it is a choice, to live with hope. At Duke, there is hope. There's a big sign in their brain tumor center. At Duke, there is hope. And that's how we chose to live with this illness. That he was not his illness. He had glioblastoma, but glioblastoma didn't have him. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we chose to do each and every day. And we talked about it, and we talked about the treatments, and we talked about the what ifs. And I didn't really like going to the what ifs, but he wanted to have conversations, and we did. I joke around that when people started learning about the diagnosis, people would say, "So what's his prognosis?" And my joke was the same standard answer, because it's such an inappropriate question to ask. So anybody who's listening to this,
don't ask that.
Don't ask that. Don't ask them what their prognosis is, because you know what? Nobody really knows. You can look at statistics, but everybody is an individual, and everybody has their own genetic makeup, and we don't know. So yeah, don't ask that. So my standard answer was, "I'm not dating again, so he'll be fine." And that would shut them up, and they'd laugh. "Oh, you're so funny." But that's how I felt. Mm-hmm. Like, he's going to be fine because I'm not dating again.
Right.
I will share with your audience that I am remarried. I did date again, and I did get married again. And that was Stephen's wishes. He made that very clear. And he made it clear probably after his first recurrence, I want to say. And I remember sitting up in Durham outside of Ben & Jerry's, and he said, "I want you to find love again. And I want you to be happy. And I want you to live your life. And I don't want you to be alone."
Yeah.
And he would say that over and over again. He said that near the end as well, when he was still able to really talk. And I would say, I can do alone. I just can't do without you. But he gave me a gift. And the gift really was that he could talk about it. You know, it wasn't something we did hush-hush. We were very open with each other. You know, we had a really great marriage. So we had this open lines of communication, and it was really lovely. Now, as far as the kids, we didn't share as much, but we didn't hide anything either. We just didn't give more information that was necessary because they were kids. And I know, you know, Liana once said to me several years ago, you did the right thing by not giving us all the information.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to carry that.
Yeah. What do you think is like the biggest lesson that you learned from Stephen?
To be grateful for every day you have. Every day. And I will tell you that Stephen wasn't like that before his diagnosis. I mean, he was always a grateful guy, and he felt very blessed with his family. But he was sort of this, you know, waiting for the shoe to drop. And the shoe dropped. And he really showed us who he was and what he was made out of, and like to the depths of his soul. Mm-hmm. What a beautiful, beautiful man he was. And the man he is, you know, because he's not here doesn't mean he's not here.
Right.
You know, he's in my heart. He's in our hearts and in our lives, and we integrate him every day and talk about him. But that was a gift, is to really live and to find so much thankfulness and to think everything's a blessing. You know, when he had his first recurrence, and that was 10 months after diagnosis, after the first surgery, and they said, we can operate again. And he was like, how lucky am I? I get to have another awake craniotomy. Like, he thought he was the luckiest man on earth. He gets another do-over.
Yeah.
You know, when he had another recurrence and they could do another treatment, how lucky am I? I get to have this treatment. You know, he was constantly saying thank you to me for everything. He'd apologize all the time. I'm sorry to put you through this. And I would say it's an honor to care for you. And near the end especially.
Yeah.
Which is hard.
Yeah.
When, you know, a GBM patient is not doing well and they're really fully declining. He was still Stephen. I was very lucky. I know a lot of people that are on this journey that their loved ones change a lot and not always for the better. Stephen was always Stephen.
Yeah.
You know, he was, I mean, sometimes he was unreasonable because the way his mind and brain was working, but he was still funny and he was still loving and he was just generous of heart, always.
Yeah. Talking about the process of when you lost your late husband, grief comes in many stages, which we've talked about previously. But first of all, what did grief look like for you? But second of all, I'd like you to talk about grief in general and the misconception of the different stages of grief as you explained prior.
Yep, absolutely. It was torture. It was agonizing. You know, and I've been grieving since the day he was diagnosed, which, you know, is anticipatory grief. Mm-hmm. You know, I talk to people whose loved ones are newly diagnosed, and we talk about anticipatory grief, and like, I'd never heard that term before. But it's a real thing. So I was grieving from the moment he was diagnosed. And then as he was dying, which is agonizing. And then when he died, and he's no longer in his earthly body, it was torturous. I don't even know that there's a real word to describe the sadness that I felt, the depth of my pain and the yearning, really just yearning for him. I just wanted him back. You know, people say, is there anything I can do for you? I said, yeah, you know, there's nothing you can do for me. Unless you can bring him back, there is nothing you can do for me. That's all I wanted. And so it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And I like to think that I let myself be in my pain. And I did a lot of the time. But now with the work I do as a grief specialist and a grief educator and a grief coach, I realized that there were times where I stuffed it. Because nobody taught me how to grieve.
Right.
I didn't know how to grieve.
And talking about, again, like the stages of grief.
Yeah.
What does that look like how did that look like for you, and how does it look like for most people?
So the stages of grief, interestingly enough, and I don't know that I'd heard of them, if I even knew about them when I was grieving, when Stephen first died. But in the work that I do, I've learned so much. And so those stages, and I'll share them with your audience, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, were really designed for the terminally ill. When Elizabeth Kubler-Ross created these, or observed them, this is what she saw in the terminally ill. Most of them would typically go through these stages. Now, maybe not so linear, but pretty much this is what she was seeing. And then she started noticing that she was seeing some of that with the bereaved as well, but definitely not linear. And so that's always my concern when people talk about stages. And I know there are some therapists who still use them because maybe they haven't done a lot of the grief training. We don't want grievers to feel like they're supposed to follow a certain pattern because grief is hard enough. And then if somebody's grieving and they're like, well, I don't feel angry, or I don't feel this, I can't even grieve right. And there are people who really like, I can't even grieve right. I'm not in any of the stages, or I'm not at this stage yet. What's wrong with me? Well, there's nothing wrong with you because the stages are not meant to follow a pattern. And I reframe them, and I'll share that with you in a moment. Grief isn't tidy. Grief ebbs and flows, and it's this messy thing. It's not prescriptive, those stages. They were never meant to be prescriptive. They're really a good description of what some grievers may experience. Now, some grievers may experience all those things, and some may experience none or one.
Right.
But it doesn't end at acceptance. It's like, okay, great, I'm done. I'm going to put that away and put that on my shelf. Grief ebbs and flows for as long as you're going to be here. When people say, how long am I going to grieve? Well, how long is your loved one going to be gone?
Forever.
That's how long you're going to grieve.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're going to be in the same agony when you're in acute grief, right? That beginning, when it just happens, that's really acute grief. So when we talk about the stages, and I reframe them, I think of denial. Look at disbelief. Like, I can't believe they're gone. I can't believe it. Sometimes 13 years later, I'm like, I can't believe he's gone.
Yeah.
That's wild to me. In anger, it's a natural response when you're grieving to be angry, whatever you're angry at. One of the things I tell clients in my workshops and groups, I say, if you're feeling angry, feel it. Do what you need to do to get it out. Punch a pillow. Go in your car and scream at the top of your lungs.
But don't punch people.
Don't punch people. Try not
pillows.
to punch a wall because you don't want to have a hole in your wall, but, that's happened too. And just, that's okay. But also take a moment and notice what the anger feels like and where you're feeling it in your body. Because more than likely, not always, but more than likely, the anger is a mask for the pain. Because sometimes it's just easier to be angry than to be profoundly sad. Because that sadness is uncomfortable and the anger feels a little more familiar.
If you feel it a certain place in your body, are there different techniques in like different areas that help you kind of like release those feelings? Mm-hmm. Or how do you kind of like work with someone that may be like, let's say one client's like, I feel a lot of it in my chest. Mm-hmm. And maybe one's like, I feel it in like my neck. Like, how do you kind of differentiate how to work through that based on where you're feeling it?
That's a great question. So I've actually done some somatic training as well.
Okay.
And body work. And if it's in the chest, I tell people just to take a breath. And sometimes it's hard, just breathing is hard.
Yeah.
So some people aren't comfortable with breath work. But I do try to get them to just take a deep breath in and breathe out. But I also tell them to put their shoulders back, open your chest up. Because typically when the chest is hurting, we're concaving and we're sort of like folding into ourselves. So I encourage that, and I encourage them to do some work, like even, and I'll just show you, like even taking your arms and going, ha, ha. And you can do it really loud. I'm not going to do it loud here. And just getting that out. I've taught a client to just, when she's really angry and just really frustrated, just punch it out. And doing that. And just notice it. You can also take a moment and just feel your body. Take a moment to just breathe. I'm all about breathing. And put your hands wherever you're feeling it. Nurture yourself. Mm-hmm. There's a part of mindfulness, and I'm also a mindfulness practitioner. And there's a mindfulness method, which is called RAIN, which is an acronym. R, recognize. So recognize that you're feeling something. Acknowledge it. Investigate it. And investigating it doesn't mean giving it a label or attaching to it. It's really noticing. Okay, I'm feeling something. Where am I feeling it? What does it feel like? Some people say, oh, it's in my stomach. It feels like butterflies, but not good butterflies. Mm-hmm. Or it's in my chest and it feels heavy and tight. And then just nurture yourself through it. Self-compassion. Give yourself self-compassion and show yourself some grace.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that's like how do I deal with this? Like, I'm sitting in grief and it's not going away. And yes, you know, time is passing, but they don't know how to process what they're feeling. Like, what can people do?
So my answer when people talk about dealing with grief, I say grief is not something you deal with. It's something you feel. So when we make it a task and say, I can't deal with this, or how do I deal with this? When we put it like that, that's a lot of stress that you're putting on yourself. I got to deal with my grief. You don't have to do anything with your grief. You just need to feel your grief, be in your grief. And sometimes you even get to take a break from it. Sometimes you get a little respite and you can do something just, it's not taking your mind off, it's not stuffing your feelings, because I'm not about that. It's not about keeping busy and ignoring it and avoiding it. But sometimes you just need a break. It's exhausting. But really letting yourself feel it. You know, not pushing it away, not keeping
That's also uncomfortable.
Busy. It's so uncomfortable.
It's so hard to like sit with what you're feeling.
So uncomfortable. You know, any hard feelings. You know, it's really great when you're feeling happy and joyful, and nobody tells you not to feel that way. Like nobody says, "Oh, don't be happy, Amber. What are you feeling joyful about?" But unfortunately, we are uncomfortable with hard feelings because nobody has told us it's okay to have them.
Yeah. Have you had anyone in your life tell you post Stephen passing away that like, why are you happy you lost your husband? Like,
never.
Okay.
Never.
Because I feel like frequently I'll see commentary that's like, well, like, why are you happy? Like your dad passed away. I'm like, am I supposed to be sad for the rest of my life?
And here's your answer.
Yeah.
Joy and sadness can coexist.
Yeah.
Two things can be true at the same exact time. I can be joyful, I can love my life, and I love my life. I have a great life. And I miss Stephen every day. And I grieve him every day. Not to the magnitude and intensity that I did 13 years ago, but I have my grief bursts. I have my moments, whether it's our wedding anniversary or a milestone that my kids are experiencing. I will have those moments, and I say, welcome back, old friend. Nice to see you. Let's hang.
Have you had any, or like which milestones have you kind of gone through since Stephen passed away? I know it's, you know, been
college graduations.
Okay.
So
no one's married yet.
No one's married yet.
Okay.
College graduations was definitely for me.
How did your kids handle that?
They were good with it. So when Derek graduated for his undergrad, and I'll go back, I want to preface this with the one thing that Stephen said every time before he went for surgery was, make sure the kids go to college. It was very important to Stephen that the kids got a college education. And it was important to both of us. That doesn't mean that every kid needs to get a college education, but this was just how Stephen felt, and so he provided for them to be able to do that. And so he would talk about that. And before Stephen died, he met with our rabbi, and he wrote a living will, so he wrote a letter to all of us.
Oh, okay.
And so, and I can't remember if the kids' letter say go to college, but I remember it was do good things and all of that. So when Derek graduated from college, it took him a little bit longer for his undergrad. And it was also the same week of Stephen's angelversary. So I was very emotional when Derek graduated. Leon and I both were very emotional when Derek graduated. It took him a little bit longer to get there.
And
he did it. And he also he's also got a master's degree.
Wow, amazing.
So yeah, he's amazing. My kids are amazing. That was really, I was so happy. That's where the joy and sadness can coexist. I was so happy. And I was sad that Stephen wasn't there to witness it, that we could experience it together. I don't feel like Stephen was missing out. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about their loved ones. Oh, they're missing so much. Like you may feel like your dad's missing so much. I don't feel that Stephen's missing anything because I don't know what Stephen's missing. I mean, I know Stephen's a part of our world in everything we do. I know that we miss sharing those moments with him. So Derek's college graduation was one of those milestones.
Right.
That was beautiful and wonderful and painful all at the same time. And I will say, so Derek, both the kids have their father's letters. I have his letter too. And Derek had the letter with him the day he graduated.
Oh.
And he posted it. And then Liana graduated, and it was also, he should be here.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to share this with him. Now, I'm remarried. I've been remarried nearly 10 years. In July, it'll be 10 years. And I have a wonderful second husband. I call him my earthly husband. And it's wonderful that I get to experience those things with him. He's a really good, step parent. He's very involved in the children's lives, and he's widowed as well. And so he has 2 boys who I am close with. And it's the same thing for him when his boys graduated. His late wife, Rona, wasn't there. He was excited and happy for them and happy to share it with me, but there was that twinge that person, that other parent isn't there.
Yeah. What would you say to someone that's currently going through grief that is like, you're telling me to sit with my feelings. I don't know what that means. I don't like it. I don't feel comfortable. Like, what are maybe a few grief tips or tricks? I don't like the word tricks, but like, what are a few tools? What are a few grief tools that maybe might help someone that's currently grieving, whether it's the loss of a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a loved one, any of the above?
Show yourself some grace. Cut yourself some slack. Journal. If you're comfortable journaling, doodling. And when I talk about journaling, I mean taking pen to paper, not typing on your laptop or on your iPad or on your phone and doing notes, electronically. It's really important to go from the mind to the heart to the hand to the pen to the paper and just write. And write that it's uncomfortable. And write however you're feeling. Don't even think about it. Just sort of do free writing. And I think writing is great. Drawing. Getting outside in nature.
Okay.
Is really healthy. Getting outside and moving your body, doing some of the movements that we just talked about, but also any kind of movement. If you're a runner or a walker, if you like to lift weights, if you like to do yoga, Pilates, any of those things are really helpful when it's uncomfortable sitting with those feelings, because it helps move things out of the body. The body keeps the score. Right? Our bodies hold things, and we have memory cells that get activated. So paying attention to that. Now, that doesn't mean moving your body so you don't feel bad. It's moving your body so you can feel your feelings, but maybe not feel so overwhelmed by them. And it is overwhelming, and especially in that acute early part of grief. I don't call it a stage, but it's sort of it's a timeline.
Right.
And there's just no way of getting around it. People aren't comfortable. They want to be done with it. They want to get through it. And you can't. You just have to keep moving. But you can't ignore it. You can't avoid it. You can't go around it. Because if you try to do that, it will come back and bite you at some point.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, like, how is that, from what you've seen with clients that you've worked with, like, how does that remanifest for someone, let's say, that lost someone years ago and they were like, I'm not going to sit with this. I'm not going to focus on my grief. How does it come back and manifest?
It can manifest in illness. It can manifest in sleeping problems.
Got those.
It can it can manifest in anxiety and panic. It can manifest in your relationships and how you relate to other people. It can manifest in so many ways. You're not being able to focus, which is not unusual, especially when you're early grieving and focusing. I have a client now. She said, I want to read, but I can't read. I said, well, that's not unusual.
Yeah.
So don't put that pressure on yourself. Find something that you can do that you enjoy. Maybe you enjoy just watching TV.
Right.
That's okay. That's okay. And here's what I would say. Everyone's grief is unique and individual to them. It's as unique and individual as our fingerprints. And our relationship are unique and individual to us. So don't compare your grief or your grief experience to anybody else's.
Yeah,
everybody gets to have their experience. So, sometimes I'll hear somebody say, well, so-and-so is doing great. Why aren't I? Well, I don't know what great means, first of all. And I say, well, how do you know number one, how do you know?
Right.
How do you know that what you see on the outside is what's really happening on the inside? And if they're doing great, good for them. That's their journey. You have yours, and you get to own yours, and it gets to be your grief. And nobody gets to determine or dictate how you're supposed to do it.
If someone's listening to this and they're like, my loved one is still here and they're maybe experiencing some anticipatory grief, but like don't understand how to work through it or don't have the tools, is dealing, not the word dealing, but is experiencing anticipatory grief a time that you would recommend someone to reach out to a grief counselor if they're open to it?
Absolutely. You can reach out to somebody like me. I'm not a therapist, but I'm a grief coach and a grief specialist. And I have a client right now who is working with me, and their loved one has not died yet. And hopefully they won't for a while, but it's hard to say. And they found me, and it's been really helpful for them to be able to meet and to sort of flesh some of this out. I think anytime you can seek support, do it. Some people are not comfortable getting support. Any way you can find support. There's also support groups, caregiver support groups.
Which you're also a leader of a great support. I'd love for you to explain more about that for those that don't know.
So I help the National Brain Tumor Society. They have grief support conversations. And it'd be 2 years
once a month, right?
It's once a month, the first Thursday of the month. And you can go to braintumor.org, click support, and it'll take you right to it. You'll see there are two different
I'll link it below for anyone that's curious.
There's two different support conversations they have. One is for grief. So that's for anyone who has lost a loved one to a brain tumor.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what relation.
It doesn't matter whether, it doesn't matter. We have people that join us that it's a parent, it's a spouse, it's a life partner, it's a fiance, it's a best friend, it's an uncle, it's a grandparent. It doesn't matter.
Anyone.
Anybody who has had a loved one die from a brain tumor. It doesn't have to be GBM. It could be any number of the brain tumors that are out there. And they also have something called Brain Tumor Support Conversations, which is led by some really amazing people, facilitated by Adam Hayden, who you know, Lisa O'Leary, and Sean Carey. And they're doing that. And that is the third Sunday of the month, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's for anyone who is a patient or a caregiver. Now, it could also be, or a friend, but it could also be for somebody who's grieving. Like a lot of people that join our group, the grief group, also go to that one.
Okay.
So I highly recommend seeking support. And I will tell you that is not something I did. We did have a therapist. After Stephen was diagnosed, he said he wanted to go back. We had done some couples counseling because marriages sometimes has its moments. And so he wanted to go back. And so we did some couples, and then I just went by myself during his illness.
Okay.
And then right before he died, he wanted to see her again. And so we saw her a couple of weeks probably before he died, which was great. And then I started continuing to see her after he died. And I go for tune-ups with a different therapist now. I think that getting support is really important. Even a peer support in the brain tumor world, in the brain tumor community. It is so isolating living in the brain tumor world as a patient and as a caregiver. And I see this with caregivers all the time. Because it's a rare disease. You know, I say, yeah, it's rare, but it's not so rare when it's your loved one. People don't know or understand. If they're not part of this world, they don't get it. Mm-hmm. And all cancer sucks. It absolutely does. I would never take that away from anyone. And it's the brain, right? It's the brain. It's the motherboard.
Right.
It's everything we are. You know, it's the essence of who we are. And I did not seek the support right away. I wish I had. But there were no groups. You know, it was 15 years ago. But I found online support. And I ended up meeting a lot of people online that I became very close with, and still am close with some of them. And we would message each other because we were all caring for husbands with GBM.
Right.
And it was really helpful. But that wasn't until 8 months after his diagnosis. And I sure wish I'd found them sooner, but I'm sure glad I didn't find them any later.
Right.
So I recommend, because there is a plethora of opportunities for support now, find them. And find which one fits for you. Maybe you go to one and say, this is not my group. This doesn't work. But maybe there'll be another one that will feel right to you. You know, it's not one size fits all. So you find the fit for you. But don't be afraid or hesitant to seek the support, because you deserve it.
Right. I'll link all of your information in the caption below in case anyone is curious about getting in touch with you and is interested in connecting with a grief specialist, grief counselor. But I think the information that you're able to provide, that you shared today on the episode, is going to be super helpful for a lot of people that are listening, no matter what stage of grief that they're in, whether it's anticipatory. My words are not functioning today. Anticipatory grief, or, you know, if they are currently grieving at whether it's acute or
early. So there's acute, which is immediately after that. And sometimes acute can last a year. Mm-hmm. There's early grief, which is typically the first couple of years. And then it becomes mature grief, which is forever.
Right.
But again, not prescriptive, just descriptive. You know, we live in a grief illiterate society. And grief is the normal response to loss. We are all grievers. We're all grieving something. And grief is also the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And I see with a lot of people some of those conflicting feelings. You know, it's the joy and sadness. It's when your loved one dies, especially from GBM, there may be some relief. And you're like, how can I feel relieved? Because they're not in pain. Because it's exhausting. And you're exhausted. And you're heartbroken. So you can do both. You can feel those conflicting feelings and let them be. And sort of let them out. And, and understand that that's normal. All of that is normal. Any change in our lives is going to present a grief response, no matter what. And so being in that space, letting your grief breathe, befriending your grief, which sounds really something like, how can I be friends with my grief? Befriending your grief and really welcoming it in really transfers some of the energy that you're expending with the pain and really letting that give you more source of energy. Because when you're fighting against it, I say, you've got this is your grief, and you're pushing it and pushing it away and fighting against it, you're making it harder for yourself. And you need to look at what your grief stories are. Where did you learn to do that? How did we learn or not learn what grief is and how to grieve in a really meaningful way? Mm-hmm. And how do we find meaning in that way? Finding meaning in our loss, not finding meaning in death, in the death of the people we are missing, but finding meaning in your life and honoring that person.
For someone that maybe is like hearing this and saying, I don't know where I learned about grief. Did I even learn about grief? Like, you don't have any feedback response of this topic. Like, what would you say to them?
Well, if you don't think you learned anything about grief, that's what you learned about grief.
Nothing.
We don't talk about it.
Right.
If nobody talked about it, and think back to when you were a child. Think about if you had a pet die or a grandparent die and nobody talked about it. If you had a breakup, and we talked about this before, if you have a breakup, typically the response for the breakup is, they were a jerk. You're better off without them. Mm-hmm. Plenty of fish in the sea. You'll find somebody else. You're wonderful. And those are lovely platitudes. And they may very well be true. Maybe you are better off without them. Maybe they were a jerk. Maybe they weren't worthy of you, whatever that is. But in that moment, your heart is hurting. And no one is actually talking to you about your feelings.
Yeah.
So they're dismissing the feelings and not even asking about them. So what's the message? Don't feel bad. We're not going to talk about it. You'll find somebody else. Replace that loss.
But no one's telling you to replace a loved one.
No one's telling you to replace them. Well, they'll just... I heard after Stephen died, I don't know if he was gone a month, and somebody said, you're young and you're going to meet somebody. I was like, excuse me?
I heard that a lot too.
Are you talking to me?
It's like, that's not even on your mind. Like, literally, what the fuck are you saying right now?
When you're ready to start dating, I have somebody in mind for you. It's like, okay, no thank you.
Did I ask you?
Yeah, exactly. No thank you.
Unsolicited advice.
So, yeah, and people are full, people are so well-intentioned and they're so misinformed. Sometimes. Yeah, I do say that too, actually. It's funny you said that. Sometimes most people, not all people, are really well-intentioned. They're saying things that they think may be the right thing, or they don't know what to say, so they always say the wrong thing. But they're so misinformed because this is the case in point, nobody knows how to grieve.
Yeah.
Nobody has learned that grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss and that we should just embrace it and let it be. Nobody's going to say to you, Amber, if you're in a good mood, don't be in a good mood.
Right.
You're so happy, don't be happy. Don't smile, don't laugh. Nobody will ever say that to you or to anybody. Oh, we're so happy, you're happy. Oh, this is so great. And then you're sad, it's like, don't be sad.
Yeah.
Oh, don't cry. Oh, it'll be okay.
What are some things that you think that are beneficial to hear if you're someone that's currently going through grief? Like, what are things that helped you in your particular situation when you were grieving, Stephen? Like, in let's say the acute stage, like, what are some things that might be, like, these are green flags of what you can say to someone?
Yeah, and this is what I always recommend in my workshops. I don't know how you feel, but I'm here. I love you and I'm here. That's the best thing. Sometimes saying nothing is better than saying the wrong thing, but not saying nothing and that you ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. Here's the other thing. When you're talking to somebody who's grieving, say their loved one's name. Talk about them. You're not going to remind them of their pain and that their loved one's gone. They already know.
Yeah.
So talk about them. Ask questions. And if you have a story, like if somebody knows about your dad and they say, oh, Amber, I remember when your dad and I did such and such.
I love that.
The best.
It's the best.
The best. So my kids love it too when people talk about Stephen. I love when people talk about Stephen. When people say to me, I still miss Stephen, I'm like, oh, I love that. Mm-hmm. So talk about them. And if you're someone who is grieving, feel comfortable talking about your loved one. Even if other people seem uncomfortable, you can show them, not that it's your burden to do this, but you can show them how normal it is. And you can help them see that it can be normalized. Because that's what we want to normalize grief. So as a griever, you get to do it that way. And if you want to talk about your loved one, talk about your loved one. If people are coming at you, and in my podcast we talk about this, like the person who said to me after Stephen died, accept all invitations. I said, I don't think so. Now, some people would want to accept all invitations. Mm-hmm. That wasn't me. The social butterfly I was no longer. Now I'm social again, but in that first couple of years, certainly that first year, I wasn't. I didn't want to do anything. I wanted to be home with my kids, or just be home laying on my bed, eating ice cream, or whatever I was doing. So if somebody says to you, you're joining us, and you're coming over, especially like during holidays, you can say, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Right now, I'm not up for doing that. If I change my mind, may I let you know? And people are like, oh, no, you have to come. Thank you very much. Trust that I know what is best for me right now. I need to do what's best for me. A lot of times people will say, oh, but your loved one wants you to be happy. Like, Stephen wants you to be happy. Stephen doesn't want you sad. I know what my loved one wants for me, and my loved one wants me to be true to myself right now and to care for myself. May I have a rain check? And I always say, can I let you know? Can I let you know at the last minute? I may come and I may need to leave.
Holly Gainsboro, thank you so much for coming on this episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM. I think your insights about not only your journey with Stephen, but just about grief in general and the work that you do is able to help so many people. So if anyone's interested, I will link your information below if they want to reach out to you. But thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and coming down to meet with me.
Thank you for bringing me here.
It's so nice to finally meet in person.
I'm so excited to be a part of this with you and to get to be with you. You are very special. Everybody who watches your podcast knows that you are a dynamo in this arena.
Thank you.
What you've done in the past 5 years is just mind-blowing to me.
Thank you.
That you have taken your pain, right? We've both done something different, but you've taken your pain and made it a real purpose and a passion to be present for other people.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM. To learn more about the Glioblastoma Research Organization, you can visit us online at gbmresearch.org, on Instagram or Facebook at Glioblastoma Research, on Twitter at glioblastoma.org, or on LinkedIn as Glioblastoma Research Organization. To start your own fundraiser, to donate, or to learn how to get more involved with the organization, please email us at contact@gbmresearch.org, and we'll see you on the next episode of Glioblastoma AKA GBM.